Hello, I'm Dan Winter, Fractal Field, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com, and I'm joined by the very exciting Joey from Library of the Untold. It's a very important group. Go ahead, Joey.
Oh, I love it. Thank you very much. Dan, I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite a bit now. And the reason is every time I mention something online about quantum physics or plasma, my commentors get in the comments just like, you got to talk to Dan Winter. You got to get him on, go look at his work. Sometimes they'll just type your name in all caps, Dan Winter. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting it, guys. So exploring your work, there's a couple things I love about you. And one of the main ones that struck me immediately is in this like entertainment realm of the esoteric and the occult sciences and whatnot, you are very much not a cult. These guys are out here wearing their white robes and their beads or shaving their eyebrows and stuff. And you are just you coming across naturally and straightforward. So, and then digging a little bit deeper, I came to find that you are pretty much one of the OGs in this field. You've been doing this stuff since before I was born, before most of my community was born, friends with Itzhak Bentov. And so you are in every way, shape, and form, one of the catalysts of this type of movement, not just one of the coattails that's joining in on it, like kind of like I am, you know? So that would lead me into my own personal question to you is early on, what got you into this kind of esoteric scientific stuff and how did that affect your life? How did your life lead up to that?
Well, thank you. Yeah, we rather originally started that everything we talk about, physics of spirituality, physics of psychology, was based on my electrical engineering background. As you know, I did electrical engineering, University of Detroit, and it was actually there. So I was in the psychophysiology lab. I built the polygraph that we use with the world famous Dr. Albert Axe, originator of biofeedback. We measured the difference between fear and anger in electrical terms on the polygraph. And I built that polygraph. And so obviously, my start was the physics of emotion. The old joke was, well, I couldn't understand if you are measuring the GSR of a college student and you show him Playboy magazine, the change in resistance in his skin surface is faster than a transistor. I mean, hello, why and why is it decreased resistance? So I was studying the physics of emotion, and then after graduate school for a while, I actually went to the Gurdjieff School and studied sacred gymnastic. But before that, I was hired by IBM. I was trained as a systems analyst in Detroit, Chicago, and Poughkeepsie. And short story long, I've been teaching physics of consciousness for over 30 years, and I have dozens of inventions. And all of it is based on this simple physics that implosive charge collapse, plankfire.com, Plancphire, plankfire.com, available in Kindle and print and PDF.
I'm going to make sure to put a link to that in the description,
Thank you. Yeah.
everybody,
And so,
because I was looking for it too.
yeah. Well, everything I did from beginning to end, how emotion works, how love works, how alchemy works, how plasma works, how healing works, how negentropy works, how self-organization, the physics of the cause of gravity, the physics of the cause of consciousness, and the physics of every single one of my implosion water inventions and my 5 or so plasma fire inventions, fireray.com. Every one of them is based only and exactly on this equation, Planck times integer multiples golden ratio, called fractality perfected, which is the physics of charge collapse. And later, if you want to talk about Kundalini or the physics of death, everything is based on the fact that if you do that right, you gain energy during charge collapse. Exactly the only way to have successful death, for example.
Perfect. Well, on that note, I might as well ask you then, can you tell us about charge collapse? What are we actually looking at with that?
Yeah, that's the right question. That is actually the only question.
It can be simple, I suppose.
Well, let's put it this way. Almost all of the physics community, the very conventional physics community, agrees that charge collapse is the cause of gravity and the cause of consciousness. This is not new information. And
Okay.
a large part of the physics community, conventional, also believes that fractality obviously related to charge collapse, is also the cause of gravity. What I discovered is the cause of charge collapse.
Okay.
I took, which then therefore is the cause of gravity in
The
consciousness.
cause of the cause.
Thank you. So the idea is that you take the musical key signature of the universe called Planck, Planck, Planck length and time, a unit of length and time into which every wave physics has ever measured divides evenly. That's the musical key signature of the universe. It's the only way gravity and consciousness is propagates. It's the way consciousness and life force is quantized and many things. It's the way everything is quantized. Nothing is quantized by anything else. So you take that unit, Planck length and time, and multiply by integer powers of golden mean ratio, which is fractality perfected, and you get 200 or more profound physical variables. 3 precise radii of hydrogen, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precession year, all of the frequencies associated with Kundalini, sacrocranial, HRV, EEG, Schumann. The list is 200 units long. You can plankfire.com, you'll see it all there. So that predicts the dimensions, the definition of sacred length and time, the only definition of sacred length and time, for example, precisely the British foot. The reason
Right.
is that that charge collapse gains energy during that collapse. And that implosive collapse is the cause. It's the reason seeds germinate. It's the reason consciousness forms as a liquid crystal vortex in the synaptic array of your head. It's the reason gravity exists, because when the charge implodes by golden ratio, the heterodynes recursively add and multiply phase velocity. That's called acceleration of charge towards center, the only definition of gravity. So it's the reason objects fall to the ground, basically. And it's the reason bliss exists. It's the reason charge radiance exists. It's the reason negentropy exists. It's the only reason any action at a distance exists. When physics says entanglement, all they actually mean is phase conjugation, which is perfected embedding. And this is phase conjugation. I carry on. Obviously, I've been talking about this too
Right.
long, but you get the point.
Well, when I hear something like this, tying seeds to joy from the cosmos, gravity, all the way to what we have within, I can't help but think of the Upanishads and the way that they describe all of these things as germinating from one particular thing, from one particular formula that is a catalyst of all of these things, whether high or low. And that makes sense if you consider all of these ancient alchemical diagrams. There's a parallel between our system and the planets, as if it's I don't want to say the same thing, but like they dance with each other, kind of.
Yeah, it's all alchemic, and the chem in alchemy means access to a black hole. Chem was the name of Egypt, the place of the black, and the black hole is specifically implosive charge collapse. Short story. So my plasma tech, originally therify.net, now firay.com, it was famous. They set it up in Tennessee, and the flower shop across the street noted dramatically the longevity of their flowers on the average doubled just across the street from the little plasma lab. And of course,
Really?
they've measured hundreds of times that pyramids cause seeds to germinate. In fact, if you read Seeds of Knowledge, they reason that the primary function of most of the Earth's stone circles and sacred sites was to cause seed germination. And seed
Right, right,
germination is caused by the fact that they're electrically imploding with charge collapse, which generates the suction implosion, which is how they attract the first nutrient. So it's obvious if you get a centripetal electric field. But the thing is, physics doesn't know why anything is centripetal. That's why they don't know what consciousness or gravity is.
can you define for us centripetal?
Yeah, basically, when charge is imploding, say for water, or the imploder.com, which is now fractalwater.com, we put water, I should have brought the nozzle up, but we put water down the vortex based on my equation for hydrogen radii, which is a perfected vortex. We call it Schauberger's dream. And if the water's a bit piezo, we have 60% average increase in marijuana growth, for example, because the implosion generates hypersolubility, spin density, and hydration is the issue of most diseases and most plant growth, effectively. So that implosion, because you're gaining energy during collapse, and just finally, to finish the core physics here, when the implosion of charge reaches the Planck threshold, which is literally the tip of the pine cone, at the
Okay.
Planck threshold, this is the reason gravity only propagates this way. The inertia, it's called transverse EMF, is converted to coherent longitudinal EMF, incorrectly called scalar. And that longitudinal EMF is the only media in which gravity waves propagate, as Bearden proved by equation in his book Gravitobiology. And it is the only physics of action at a distance, and it's the only physics of gravity waves, and it is the only physics of the collective conscious, and it is the only physics of the array you must inhabit in order to lucid dream or die successfully. It's the reason only at those longitudinal nodes was commercially valuable telepathy measured per Korotkov. So the nodes of the longitudinal array, and they look like this. The longitudinal will pass through just about anything, but this is the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and hydrogen. And so at the nodes of that array, the longitudinal inertia will then compress to center, implode, and exchange inertia with a transverse, enabling, for example, heat containment at a distance, the only physics of action at a distance, which Einstein incorrectly called spooky. We know exactly the physics of action at a distance. It should not be called entanglement. It should be called phase conjugation. I go too fast, but I've been at this.
Oh, that's that. I'm going to back you up a little bit. And well, by the way, to the commenter who wanted to play a drinking game of taking a shot every time he busts out that blue model, don't do that. All right. It's not going to end well. So I've got this idea of the implosion being the vortex, right? That is, it comes into a sharper, into the planks, basically.
That's right.
Help me out with longitudinal waves.
That's the right question. So basically, all our radio, all our communication, all our electromagnetic work on Earth is all based on the transverse or up and down component of the electromagnetic wave. The compressional
like a sine wave.
Well, yes, but specifically where the inertia is, the up and down wave is perpendicular to the direction of propagation. That's called transverse. However, if the inertia is traveling in a compressional wave called longitudinal or sometimes scalar, that creates the ability for, well, first of all, it creates the ability to propagate at golden ratio multiples of the speed of light, which Raymond Chow measured, proving I'm right about causing gravity. But the longitudinal component will travel through about anything. And most physicists do not have a clue how to pick up a longitudinal EMF or how to propagate, even though that's the physics of the Princeton Noosphere project, the Josephson Junction, where they measured when 3,000 people died on 9/11. They measure the collective unconscious that way, but they don't even know that they're picking up a longitudinal wave. But that's what it is. That's what the Aboriginals called the dreaming track songline, is the longitudinal array. And that's what you inhabit when you lucid dream and astral travel.
There are random number generators on Earth that actually went haywire with coincidences.
Well, they call it a coincidence, but the generators were motorized by a Josephson junction, which they don't even know is a square wave capacitor, which picks up the longitudinal component. It's because they're stupid. I don't mean to be gentle here, but anyway. But their Josephson junction motorized their random number generators. That's how they picked up the longitudinal component. That's why it burped on 9/11.
Because it doesn't give a hoot about time. In fact, time is just something that we are subject to in our biological beings. It's not the reason that they started went haywire before this event was because we have this collective conscious energy that is palpable.
It is collective and conscious and palpable, but time is very specifically defined here. I don't think Einstein really understood. Time is only a name for for the experience of relative spin rate, nothing more, nothing less. So, for example, as you approach death, if you're going to do it successfully, you'll see your whole life in a matter of seconds. That's called spin density compression, which is the only way to enter the array coherently to take your memory through death. And that's why you see the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral archetypically at the moment of death, because your DNA knows if you want to die successfully, you got to compress well.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because this might be kind of a running theme for this episode, especially with some of the questions that I have prepared here. Actually, that I don't have prepared. My viewers went wild when I told that you were coming on, and they have questions that I was going to put them all at the end, but as you kind of say things, I'm reminded of some of these. So, I have this one here. Afro, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong, Afro, sorry, but Afro Barika, thank you. Ask Dan to explain in layman's terms how plasma implosion works. You already got that. And how it facilitates retaining memory through death.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. It's perfect. Well, first, remember what plasma is. Plasma is a name for a cloud of charge, and cold plasma, which is probably one of the most famous medical treatments today, is the ability to propagate the cloud of charge without heat, which is very famous medically and behind our FiRay.com, formerly Therify.net. Now, plasma is 99.999% of the universe. And the
Right.
rest of the universe is actually compressed plasma that stores inertia named mass. So actually, literally everything is mass. So, I mean, everything is plasma. Another way to say that is to say the unified field is comprised of a superfluid named charge whose compressibility behaves like a superfluid, and that compressibility is what enables mass to exist and to communicate. So when plasma is imploded, what happens is it recursively turns inside out, which happens to define the origin of consciousness and the origin of everything. So
I got to get me one of those.
it also defines the moment when the heart feels compassion. So you
Okay.
can measure the voltage wave, then it turns inside out recursively, and you feel compassion because your heart's imploding. You literally turn inside out for your lover. Well, that implosion connects by centripetal force to the center of that into the array, the longitudinal array. So let's return this conversation to electrical engineers. Electrical engineers measured at university the frequencies which cause lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
LucidDreamTeam.com, you can see some of these. And so it just turns out, oh, what a coincidence, that those frequencies, which are universally shown to trigger lucid dreaming, largely correspond to plankfire.com. Hello,
Yeah.
which happens to be also the
So,
frequencies of the Schumann and the brainwave and bliss. So
right.
that means that what's causing you to lucid dream is implosion, which is how you precede all forms of radiance called bliss. So if you have access to compression, successful compression, sometimes called bliss or sacred space, then the experience of that compression, your DNA recursively braids implosively. You can measure that. The phonons of heart coherence trigger the DNA. We measured that. And the implosion in the DNA recursive blading called fusion in the blood, fractalfield.com says fusion in the blood. What that then happens is that the body, which is primarily occupied by transverse electromagnetics, but during that implosion, the body emits coherent longitudinal electromagnetic, the
Okay.
only physics of telepathy, the only physics of lucid dreaming, the only physics of the array and gravity, and which was
So,
called the Ba from the Ka in Egypt, which was called
yeah.
Keshan body by Gurdjieff, was called the rainbow light body by Tibetans. Physicists call it coherent longitudinal propagation. It's the reason
See.
Luke Skywalker had to use a cave. Could have never done it in a metal building full of Wi-Fi and electricity.
Just like our ancient shamans did going into
Yeah.
caves to,
Well,
yeah.
because
So,
they had access to Schumann. The Schumann doesn't make it
right.
into our poisonous cities. No. So you can't do
Right.
compression, you can't do bliss. And see, when you have bliss, your body implodes its environment. So if you're in a metal building full of poisonous electrosmog, it's a hell of a place to
Right.
have bliss, and it's a hell of a place to die. But anyway,
Well, I want to ask you about hygiene in a
well,
moment. Uh, but I mean, I don't want to interrupt at all, by the way. Tell me to shut up, but just to make sure I heard you correctly in that. Uh, Telepathy, lucid dreaming, successful death, these are in the same umbrella. Thus, we can practice for a successful death
absolutely.
by practicing staying lucid, falling asleep, for example.
Yeah, it's the physics of lucid dreaming. There's hundreds of books on lucid dreaming, but now we know a lot more about the physics. The physics is that, for example, if you're on a magnetic line cross, if it's sunrise or sunset, the definition of sacred space, these environments help you compress well, implode, and propagate in that array like every Aboriginal knew. They call it a dreaming track song line. And so that enables you to radiate into that coherent array. And that was the name for ancestor memory, which is the only Aboriginal name for God, that array. And
Right.
Karatkov proved that these are the only places telepathy is commercially measurable, actually, the longitudinal nodes. So I don't know if we've answered the question to the questioner, but just so by imploding correctly, getting access to bliss, the hygiene for bliss, the diet for bliss, the environment for bliss. The other aspect is if you think only shareable thoughts, then your hair stands up continuously, which means you implode charged and you never
Okay.
die. So death was only invented by biology to persuade us to stop thinking unshareable thoughts.
Okay, help me out with that. Shareable thoughts. Is this like a righteousness thing? Is this like
It's
don't
physics.
think
It's
things that
pure physics. After we discovered that the second order power spectrum of the EKG called realheartcoherence.com. I'm credited in the literature with inventing the word heart coherence because I discovered its measurement, second order power spectrum, the EKG. It turns
I've
out
been
that,
using your word for a year now
okay, it
without
turns out
even knowing.
the amplitude of that peak of the amount of heart coherence is a functional lie detector.
Okay.
It's also a functional measure of kinesiology. The reason is that's called a shareable wave. In other words, that form of coherence can propagate. It turns out that ancestor memory for a billion years has been gathering a library of survival information called the array. And the
Okay.
only way in or out is to compress well, which is to have what's called a shareable thought, which is a climax form of coherence. And when you have a shareable thought, which is say you distill every event in your life to pure principle, then you will never die. So,
Okay.
and so once you find the principle behind it, there's no more war. It's all pure principle. And then so that
Right.
becomes part of shareable memory, survival memory, and the collective conscious can embed with that. Any other form, for example, anger, which is 1/7 in the wave physics of emotion, is absolutely uncompressible and will never survive death.
Okay. So authenticity, love, these are the shareable thoughts that we should be practicing in our every moment.
Yeah.
And we should catch ourselves. I have these angry thought loops sometimes, whether it's going to be like what I'm going to say when I get up there to T-Mobile to bitch about my bill or something or another where I just have these,
I like it.
I've got these and they reoccur. They have a repeat pattern, and I have to catch myself. But then once I catch myself, I find myself drifting back into these self-destructive thoughts. And I guess that means trying to be mindful in every moment of our particular thoughts, knowing that we are not those thoughts incarnated, and practice that authenticity on a regular basis. That's how we compress.
Beautiful example. And for example, so if you're angry at your T-Mobile representative, if you get inside the psyche deep enough of your T-Mobile representative to find out what deeply, deeply, deeply motivates them, then you will feel for, and suddenly it will all be pure principle.
Yes. All right. These things are contagious, it
But
seems.
let's tell the Iranians and the Israelites.
Yeah. Somebody needs to. All right, so I've got this one, and I think this would have been a great way to kick it off, but Staro Star 975. Tell us about the nature of the geometry of the soul and its integration with the geometry of the absolute. Why do we only reflect certain aspects of the whole?
Well, at physicsofsoul.com, we have about 50 documentaries, and we're clear what it is. And we think the only way we'll survive AI is to teach our kids the physics of soul, actually.
Oh,
And
okay.
the physics of soul is really quite simple. When the body implodes with plasma, has access to a bliss experience, for example, or kundalini, um, that makes the aura become spin dense, implosive, and centripetal and propagate into that collectivizing coherent longitudinal array called collective unconscious or communion of saints. And so the ability to implode and create leverage in that array is actually something that the bad AI can eat, unfortunately. That
Okay.
it's actually the physics of soul. That's the reason hundreds of ET star systems have their ships rotating around Earth right now, because that's the value here. The value
Okay.
is actually that humans have something that much of the humanoids have lost, which is called soul. Indicators of this is ability to take memory through death, and actually ability to manipulate or become coherent in the astral, which is where all the fun stuff happens, which is
Okay.
just past lucid dreaming, actually. So into that array. So the soul is actually imploding ball of plasma, which at the center of its implosion has wiring into the array very deeply. Now, that ability
Okay.
to implode and wire to that array is something that billions of children on Earth are absolutely losing right now. I think the
Right.
majority of children on this planet have already lost their soul, literally,
Okay.
electrically, with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi stuck in their ears,
Right.
fractionating the only thing there is that's called soul. So I think it's
Okay.
essential to understand what soul is and why it's being eaten rapidly.
The soul is a plasmatic form, a quantifiable form that is an interface between us and the absolute, the array, the Akashic, the
It's literally a donut-shaped cloud of charge you can take with you when you die. And by the
right,
way, when you die, don't enter an aluminum box. It'll kill you.
right,
No,
right,
you need to be in the same places where you can observe living orbs. This is living plasma. In metal boxes will kill it. So, and
right.
they will kill your death as well, like hospitals will. So soul is a very specific electrical quality. You can see pictures of soul leaving the body when people die suddenly all the time if they died in the forest. But if they died in the hospital, hell no. Guess why?
Yeah. This has come up on previous episodes. We have one called Science of Soul, and it's a very layman video, as you might imagine. But basically, soldiers on battlefields have seen and it's
Absolutely.
very reoccurring.
Very
Whereas
real.
people in hospitals are like, what are you talking about? If that was possible, I would see it all the time.
Not in
No.
those metal cages, hell no. Because it's actually called dielectric constant. The soul is a plasma cloud, and you stick it in an aluminum box and it's dead. And you know,
Yeah. Is this what weighs 7 ounces?
well, there, you see, that's been argued about for decades now. The truth is that the more soul you got, the more it weighs because it's only a measure
Okay.
of its inertia, but that is
Yeah.
a huge variable.
Right. So like a shaman or a guru, not a guru, but they weighed these the ascended
Yeah,
masters,
yeah.
so to speak, versus also animals.
Well,
And the
that's true.
weight difference was a huge variable.
That's right. It's a very another way to talk about that physics is it's well documented in science that when Tibetan saints die, rainbows show up. If you understand the
Yeah.
physics of rainbow, the only cause of rainbows and cause of color is pure phase conjugation of Planck. It's the reason rainbows, color, and photosynthesis exists. Fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. So the reason rainbows happen when Tibetan saints die is because they added centripetal force to their electric field.
And that electric field is now contagious to the rest of the environment,
That it
which
they
is no surprise if we are, in
which has
fact,
been made centripetal, sometimes called conscious.
yeah. So to fathom that consciousness can be quantifiable is
Absolutely.
something that I'm having so much trouble with, because the way my brain thinks is that, which is ironic to say I'm thinking of something that is unable to be thought about, but just that consciousness that is just is, and everything else on not on, in the universe is a fractal of that dreaming of itself. Does that
Well,
make sense?
let's start with a practical example. You know, my
Okay.
friend Sam Osmanagich proved the reason 1 million people a year come to his pyramid in Bosnia is because they're getting practical regeneration. They're being rejuvenated. It's documented. And then we measured the power spectra of that pyramid. See pyramidwirelesspower.com, and we know exactly why those people are getting rejuvenated. Yeah, the correct power spectra is the optimized Schumann cascade right up to the 28 kilohertz on the roof. We exactly know why all those frequencies are there. Pyramids were called the Hummer. It's humming with the Schumann cascade called a phase conjugate pump wave. That implodes and dumps inertia into the longitudinal array called global wireless power.
Yes. I
And
want to see Dan Winter t-shirts that says pyramids, the original Hummer.
yeah, that's right. Well, actually, that's from the book Two-Thirds by David Byers and David Percy. And
Oh, all right.
they called it a gravity diode, and they're right. And they called it planet taming, and they're right. That's how you hold atmosphere and precipitation on a planet's
Okay,
surface.
let's dive into that if you would. Pyramids are on these specific sites on Earth that can be measured.
The
There's
longitudinal nodes, you take the power spectra, the weak electric field, and the Schumann cascade is more present. That's the only place
okay.
to get commercial telepathy. It's the only place pyramids, cathedrals, labyrinths, remote viewing, remote healing all work better when you're at those nodes for sure.
These were the opposites of our current buildings.
Well, they understood, actually, it was Hermes specifically, Thoth Ningishita, uh,
Mhm.
who understood that when a planet is losing its atmosphere, you have to increase that centripetal force. That's why it was called planet taming. So the pyramids were
Okay.
placed at the tetrahedral latitudes to phase lock planetary spin with zodiacal spin, and that
Yeah.
implosion stabilizes gravity and atmosphere because that implosion of charge defines gravity, actually.
Okay. So when we see that pyramids on Earth, or let me hit you with this one. Speaking of atmospheric problems, Mars has pyramids at 19.47.
Tetrahedral
And
latitudes.
okay, so that's where the tetrahedron touches the sphere, basically,
It's
right?
actually where the tetrahedron touches the dodecahedron.
Okay, all right. I
and,
I
and
can't get that specific without. To me, it's a ball.
well,
But
the two tetra cubes right there, and where
okay,
the vertex is shared with the pent dodeca, that's called charge collapse. So that platonic nest is the only geometry, the only reason electron shells exist. It's only that platonic nest. It's also the only reason nuclear hadrons nest, because they're only exactly that platonic nest, tetracube, dodecacosa. That's the geometry of the atomic table, geometry of all alchemy, and the geometry of planetary orbitals. Kepler has that right because that is the only geometry of charge collapse because that self-generates golden mean ratio. Interestingly, when the clairvoyants looked at the heart of the sun, the heart of the human, and the heart of hydrogen, and they draw this Anu, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, they were drawing this.
I see. So everyone is under this impression that the pyramids on Mars and the face on Mars were a message to us. That might have been a way to recover their own planet. That geometry, all these 19, because not only is it 19.5 in latitude, longitude, but it's also 19.5-degree angle to the face on Mars versus the city.
I
This
don't
might
know.
not so much be a message to a sky viewer, but instead something that was meant to tame
Well,
that planet.
what happens is when the Federation, mostly Andromedans, decided they needed to kick the reptilian-led component of the Anak who were ruling Atlantis and enslaving humans, the nuclear war that resulted ripped the atmosphere off Mars, and the water from Tiamat caused the great flood called Lesser Dryad around 12,000 years ago. And
Okay.
that's why Mars destabilized. And the attempt to restabilize Mars was basically unsuccessful, although it could be planet tamed. You could put an atmosphere back on there if you knew what. But at that time, the Earth's orbit was so destabilizing, they had to install the moon, which didn't exist before. It was an Andromedan biosphere, hollow in metal. And actually,
Right.
if the moon,
That ties together a lot for me, those two things.
yeah, and that's the reason if the moon gets in the way, a seed won't germinate. It's because it's hollow in metal in the wrong dielectric. You put the moon between the sun and the earth, the seed stops germinating because the longitudinal wave doesn't get here.
Wow. Okay. So let me ask you this. Velikovsky, right?
Veil theory.
Emmanuel,
Veil theory.
right? So the planets may have been closer together once upon a time, and these plasmatic discharges and Venus being all haywire might have caused us to spread out. What are the chances that that density would have made our reality a little bit more etheric, less physical, so to speak, so that once upon a time stones weighed less and we had more cause and effect instancy?
Well, actually, it wasn't that the gravity was so much less at the time. And by the way, they use stones on the cliff face to float stones with piezo. That's anti-gravity in the world grid. That's an old ritual. So anytime you can piezo implode stones and make an implosive capacitor, you make gravity, obviously. But the
Okay.
the real issue at that time was that uh, planetary evolution had been stabilized beautifully by millions of years of planning by the Cedars, which though Hermes was a part of, designer of the pyramids. And he's the father of the Grail bloodline and the David bloodline, the Jesus bloodline. It's all Thoth, as every Templar knows. And but when they tried to blow the reptilian Atlanteans out of here, the solar system was so destabilized that it was highly probable Earth was losing it. And many planetary orbitals switched places. It's a very detailed story. But the
Right.
result was they then used the moon to modulate the frequencies of the asteroid belt, Van Allen belt. The Van Allen belt at that time was the reason the Anunnaki could only get in here using their nukes to blow it up, which is the reason the Ark of the Covenant exists. Implosive capacitance was a nuke container called Plague of Azoth, designed by the Syrians. But at that point, the only way they could get in here was nuke their way through. So they amplified the frequencies of the Van Allen as a way to quarantine the reptilian component of the Anak Empire, which at that time was leading the parasitic component of Atlantis, much to the
Yeah.
horror of Thoth. But it's a long story. But actually,
So
the Van Allen belt frequencies modulated the Schumann, and that's what we have to modulate. Schumann should be 7.29. It is 7.83, and that changes how pyramids are tuned. It's anyway.
wow. All right. So we have no choice. Our consciousness, the way we experience reality, is directly affected, if not created, by this electromagnetic force by the
Yeah.
moon. Is this tied to Saturn as an
Saturn,
amplifier?
for the longest time, was the home of the downside of the Anak Empire, and it is currently home for the most parasitic component of the Galactic Federation, in spite of what Elena Denon says. And so
This is
Saturn,
what the Dogon say.
yeah, well, they see the Dogons knew that Sirius B was the sun around which our sun rotates. They also knew that precession is 24,300, not 26,000 years, which Plankfire predicts, which, by the way, Walter Cruttenden, loststar.com, agrees. And so the Dogons' knowledge of Saturn and Sirius B was their knowledge of the relationship with the Galactic Federation. And at that time, the Anak Empire, the reason they moved in here, the Dracos took control of the largest stargate in our galaxy, the Trapezium Orion, and they took control of Sirius B. And
Okay.
the largest stargate in our solar system was Saturn.
So we have a binary system in our little place of the universe.
That's Sirius
And
B.
this is actually way more common than we originally hypothesized with stars.
Cruttenden worked that out in super detail, loststar.com. It's all done. The one thing he didn't know is why it's 24,300. And then I told him about plankfire.com. Now he knows.
Okay. Man. All right. So I'm kind of digesting as I'm hypothesizing a bit here. When it comes to, I've always said a little bit of an axiom, a little bit of catchphrase, I suppose, is the names have changed, but the story stays the same. We're talking about, Anunnaki, reptilians, right? All this stuff, fallen angels, Nephilim, which are the offspring or whatever. What are the chances that these names are according to the same particular forces, the same groups? I mean, or are they all separate things?
Well, the Anak were only a local family politics, and Lil Yahweh's Draco with his
Lil
father.
Yahweh.
Yeah, his
It's my rap
father,
name.
Anu, got bribed into marrying a Draco, which is why Lil Yahweh is half Draco. They gave him the trapezium, the biggest stargate in our galaxy. That's why originally the word Uru, as in Uru, Jerusalem, Uru Asa LM, Uru, Stargate, Asa, Queen of, El, place of the phase shift, Stargate. So that, which is translation of vorticity, which is obviously longitude and coherence. So
Okay.
the Draco controlled uh, trapezium, the double vortex in Orion, biggest stargate here, and then they controlled Sirius B, local stargate, and then they controlled Saturn. Obviously, that's why we thought Uru meant Draco, but it doesn't. The Draco are not actually the big problem. No. And this is where Elena really, her propaganda is, oh, well, we need the Federation to save us from the Draco Siakar. Wrong. Penny Bradley and all the people who are advanced on this know the real problem is a very parasitic AI, probably from Andromeda, locally called the Mitra, and inhabited locally by the Etorthans, and whose shapeshifter is Elena Storhan, we think. And that parasitic AI, its signature footprint is human trafficking and soul eating. And
Okay.
the Federation cannot save us from that until we learn discrimination. Otherwise, we're not a vaccine for the Orion Wars.
It's up to us and our role in it. And Elena's book, I read her book. It's long-winded. I think that she likes to tell a story, and I think it's fun, and I think it's it's exercise for the imagination. But what it really reminds me of is, and this might sound strange, but these stargates, for example, in the movie Interstellar, there's a stargate right there next to Saturn. My son plays Minecraft, and he can build a transporter stargate into the negative by a certain combination of elements.
Actually,
Right?
the logo used to create the film Stargate was the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, which are the plasma physics of a hypercube, and that is good physics for how stargates are made, actually, which is a superset of Hebrew. You take the self-organizing golden spiral and the Taurus, and
Right.
the shadows indexed by tetra are Hebrew and Sanskrit. But the superset of that, Ophanim-Enochian hypercube, is how angel bodies are built, the next dimension, as it were.
Angel bodies.
Well, it's literally how intelligent plasma becomes interstellar.
Okay.
Goldenmean.info/Ophanim. We've been teaching this for years. But the point is that stargates are a name. Originally, many of the stargates were natural, and now they can be built technologically, but they most benefit by natural plasma light. For example, the trapezium in Orion, the biggest stargate in our galaxy, is a cube, literally from a distance, which is
Is
a
that so?
simple map of how you do phase conjugation in optics. That's what the trapezium is, which is obviously how you get light cones to implode. So you set up masses in that natural array, you get a natural stargate. And the more mass that's imploding, the farther that stargate goes, because the faster than light velocities of the speed of light, golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, as Raymond Chow measured, will have more harmonics faster than the speed of light. So that stargate goes further. And the battle is always over the stargate, whether it's Jerusalem or trapezium. It always is.
Yeah.
It's, how do you get out of it?
There's a recipe here
It's very
that
simple.
becomes a stargate. How
And
do we do that within?
our plasma tech already does that on a small scale. And we're not
Okay.
even pushing that. But the point is, you can have time distortions and all. All you got to do is make plasma implode. You get the time. The example, the obsidian mirror used by the Olmec for ancestor phone calls, very similar to the Aztec mirror that John Dee used for seeing the angels. It's a black mirror, like the coating on Nostradamus's scrying cup, by which he saw the future. So it's a phase conjugate mirror which prehends coherently with the longitudinal array. Hence, that's how the Olmec made ancestor phone calls.
I see. There's a reflection taking
But
place
it's
within
a very
that
special
mirror.
kind of reflection in a phase conjugate mirror, which is at the point of implosion, it's so phase coherent, the longitudinal array is coupled. A very practical example. When you teach that frequency signature, alpha to gamma cascade in the EEG at flameinmind.com, our tech for that, flameinmind.com/lucid brain. So when John Jean-Charles Moyen replicably teleported with witnesses many times. And so we measured the brainwave signature alpha to gamma. It was off the charts coherent. And then there was an implosion in his pineal, and he would see through one eye where he'd been and the other eye where he was going. And he
Yeah.
usually went to the beach because that's where longitudinal was coherent. But the point is, the physics of the teleportation is that implosive coherence. So, and that is the implosion when the kids, we teach the same brainwave signature, but not quite such high amplitude, when the kids are learning to see without their eyes. The thing that was cool, and that's the point here, was
Mm-hmm.
kids are learning to see without their eyes, and this is fun. And there's all kinds of shows on that. flameinmind.com/outer vision. But it freaked out their parents because suddenly they started seeing their dead grandparents,
Right.
which is
Right.
the physics of clairvoyance,
Yeah.
longitudinal array coherence.
So Okay, and by the way, real quick, that long pause you had before saying that gentleman's name, I want to leave that in there because I hold the world record now for the longest Dan Winter pause. So I just want to claim that territory while I'm here. That real estate's mine. But
John Charles is a
so
nice guy.
you've been speaking about the telepathy tapes recently, and I remember the moment you learned about the telepathy tapes, speaking with a nice lady, and you had not. So you were talking about telepathy, young people, disadvantaged kids, and then she mentioned the telepathy tapes, and you had not heard of that, and it was just peanut butter and jelly.
No, there was Gail Thomas and Sarah Pugh, but Gail actually. And let me just,
Wonderful interview.
yeah, it was, yeah, thank you. But we have been helping um, autistic kids for decades. There's magazine articles with our Therify plasma, which is now phi-ray.com. And we know why it was so helpful to autistic kids, which because we added longitudinal coherence, which guess what is how you do telepathy.
Right.
So the telepathy for kids, it turned out that autistic kids, because they are so deprived of practical access to their transverse array, they became more focused on the longitudinal array called the lucid dream, the astral.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
having meetings. They would get together and have parties in the astral. This is simply learning to navigate the astral. And remember, kids are natural. In fact, when a million kids sang the same song together, the solar
Right.
flares changed so dramatically, measured 11 times.
Yeah.
It's and that is astral coherence. And that's where it's called astral battles. And that's what Jake, our teacher for the ET work.
So, according to Itzhak Bentov, the astral isn't everything. It's just another layer of between us and.
Well, it's
Correct me.
something very specific. It is the component of the longitudinal array most adjacent to our frequency axis. So I have the
Okay.
slides ready, but we don't need to play them now because you can see it
Well,
all
that's
in
that's our
golden.
goal then, is the astral,
Well,
mastering
it
that.
is because that precedes everything that happens on the physical. If you don't know who's eating you
Okay.
on the astral, man, you ain't growed up yet.
Is the astral the causal mentioned in
Yeah,
ancient texts?
let's just say that each time you add another golden ratio harmonic, remember, golden ratio harmonics times Planck are exactly the heart rate variability, the sacrocranial, the EKG, and the EEG, and the microwave. We've measured it of Kundalini.
Right.
We know exactly what it is. It's that
Right.
implosion only. And so that means you then begin to radiate into the astral, which means you can wake up in your dream and become coherent in the astral. This is what
Okay.
Jake of Astral Orma teaches. He's an Orma, Leonine, the Sphinx. And these Astral Orma, these lion gods there, man, kick butt. That's why
Yeah.
the corrupted Federation just got kicked out of the Viera, the Andromedan ship. That's another story.
It's a beautiful thing. Well, are these realms or layers of reality, are they based in Fibonacci sequence in such a way that the astral is larger than the physical, and
It,
and then the monad is bigger, is more
that
than that?
The Fibonacci is only an introduction at low numbers to the principle of golden mean ratio. Golden mean ratio is the most important ratio in all of physics, and I do mean physics, because it optimizes constructive interference, therefore compression. And compression is the solution to almost every problem in physics, including alchemy
Okay.
and surviving death. So the golden mean cascade defines how Kundalini climbs that ladder. And yes, there are many levels in that ladder. Actually, it's simple. As you go up by golden ratio, you have a longer and longer wavelength embedded, achieving more and more compression and therefore leverage. And therefore, the array of the astral embeds into a larger and larger array. So
Okay.
it is the physics of another harmonic of golden ratio times Planck that enables that longitudinal coherence to get more leverage into larger and larger array. The only definition of going to the next dimension. And you can measure that in the way the EKG power spectra braids DNA.
The key to this other side, so to speak, that is on the other side of death waiting for us. So death might not be the astral, but the astral is our key to
No,
that
definitely.
realm?
We need to unify these terms here. The lucid dream
Okay.
and the astral. Lucid dream is when you begin to wake up in the astral, and the astral is actually the array in which you inhabit. For example, our astral shaman, Jake, he will see many people recently died. They're just living inside their own local dream bubble, their fantasy, as it were. And they don't get leverage on the larger array because they're stuck in a small picture of themselves, basically. So the way you wake up in the larger arrays become coherent in the astral. And that's
Okay.
where the leverage is. And that's where, the angels and the higher beings exist. So that does not exist in aluminum buildings. Sorry. No, it ain't there. It
Right.
exists. It exists in nature where magnetic lines cross.
So let's go ahead and jump into hygiene for a moment. But first, just to clarify, the astral is deeply enthreaded with our psyche. So this is like my biggest fear is that once the body dies, you are now in a loop of your own psyche,
That's right.
thinking that it is
A
then
small
the
loop.
world.
It could be a
Right.
very small. Jake has seen this. People live in their own bubbles that need popping desperately. And the solution to that is very simple. Learn to lucid dream. And then wake up in the
Lucidity.
astral. If you lucid dream well, you will survive death well, for sure.
How do you feel about the wake back to sleep method of lucid dreaming? Is that the most effective way?
There are many ways, and a lot of them are effective. I like teaching the physics by example. When you look at your hand in the dream, the reason you wake up in the dream is the do loop where the hand wires to the homunculus is the biggest. So that will increase the implosion of compression around that do loop, looking at your hand in the dream. And that compression, implosive, is why you wake up in the dream because you become centripetal,
Okay.
getting
That
leverage.
collapses the wave function.
Exactly.
Okay. Wow. So okay, I lucid dreaming is obviously it's a goal that everyone should have,
Yes.
especially now that we know it's tied to death and
Having a soul.
having a soul in the first place. I discovered it one day by going to work early. I was doing my Wim Hof method breathing exercises before work because it's very cold
And the
on the
cold
job
water.
site.
Cold water.
Yeah.
I like
So
it.
I left my car on. It was just kind of vibing. Maybe even I even had like 528 hertz on the playing or whatever. And this day I was particularly tired. And instead of doing my Wim Hof, I was like, I'm gonna take a 20-minute nap. And I'll be damned if boom, I was awake in my dream for that moment. And I started doing it more and more. And it was, I mean, it's a thrilling opportunity to take, but I made a mistake of uh, I started doing it for the experience. I started doing it for fun, whereas I could have been figuring things out and learning and exploring myself that way, which
Mhm. Yeah.
you live and you learn. I need to get back into it.
We tried to outline introductory physics at luciddreamteam.com. And then Jake has gone a lot further. He has a school for, he calls it Battles in the Astral Urma at YouTube, which is Jake, who's made the last 5 films with us on our YouTube channel. So learning to be astral coherent is critical for sure.
Right. I just want to let everyone know right now, every time Mr. Winters here drops a website, all right, he's not selling anything. Don't think that he's out here pushing. All these are free. All of these websites are free,
Almost all.
and most of them he's just mentioned on. So I don't want people to think that that he's a salesman out here. This is all just from the kindness of his heart sharing.
Well,
With
I'd
us.
want to be clear. So plankfire.com is free. All the websites mentioned, the information is free. It's true, the technologies, uh, FireRay.com, PiezoFire.com, PlasmaFire.com, these are devices, and those are the nice thing is these devices actually work. They produce regeneration, and they're not free. We can't give them away, obviously, but they're
Oh, I
reasonable.
didn't mean the devices, but the information.
That's right. The information is all of the information we've ever shared is absolutely free. Even my YouTube channel, I turned off most of so that the ads don't bother you so much.
Oh, I love that. I've become renowned for not doing sponsorships in the first 2 minutes
Yeah.
of they always want the sponsorship, 60-second plug. But all right, so hygiene. All right, so can we talk about diet, environment, practices?
Exactly.
What's important? Can we start with diet?
Yeah. So we tried to outline a hygiene for bliss in my book, the Implosion Secret Science of Ecstasy and Mortality at goldenmean.info/conscious kids. And you can download the
One
whole
hell of a title. Yeah.
conscious kids. But and we did, you're right, we divided it into four categories: diet, environment, and the psyche, which is how to think shareable thoughts, and the kinesthetic, the movement, basically. And so the diet is basically, you need to recognize something fundamental. The reason your body spits out a huge amount of mucus the moment it touches wheat, aside from the glyphosate, is the fact that the DNA in the wheat has about 1,000 generations of monoculture, which means that DNA is angry, very, very angry, like you would
Okay.
be if your father's 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 been in jail for 100 generations. So
Born into jail, kind
boy,
of.
that
The
DNA,
wheat,
yeah. Now
the
we
amber waves of grain are born in jail.
they're born in jail, even aside from the glyphosate, which is horrible. Anyway, but now by contrast, we had a Seneca heirloom seeds garden at my farm in Western New York, Crystal Hill Farm. We have 17 different colored tomatoes and green beans. So extreme genetic diversity in that garden. And all of my friends agreed they no longer needed LSD after those vegetables. You know,
Oh boy.
no, really. So the point is, you get happy DNA. So this is like, it's very simple. Eat happy DNA. So
Okay.
when you pick up the broccoli and say, would you like to eat it? You say to the broccoli, when was the last time you experienced genetic diversity?
Okay.
And the other, and it's like the Aboriginals did. They would not go spearfishing in the morning unless they had a lucid dream the night before telling them which fish wanted to commune its memory. They were
I
sensible.
see.
They wouldn't eat their relatives. A pig is your relative, because then the whales will eat you, the shark will eat you.
So
So they
it's
knew.
not just choosing the foods like alkaline foods or whatever. It's also holding a form of communion with
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
foods.
that almost all the corn that's available to you now is absolutely poisonous to everything in your aura. However, I was there when Grandfather Dan and then Susan Ambrose, they had the Hopi corn, which would only grow if you sang the right song. And I watched multiple times when that cornmeal called the wind. And I know
Okay.
exactly why that cornmeal called the wind. So it ain't that corn is evil. Hell no. It's
Right.
monoculture made the DNA pissed off, and it should be pissed off. Somebody needs
Right.
to tell Monsanto.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, that's a whole nother monster on its own, pun intended. But so okay, is organic food worth the extra price, or is it a matter of, I mean,
It's obviously extremely complicated. Even, for example, here in France, they call it organic cheese, but they're allowed to use some vaccines. It's messy, messy. But
yeah,
still, the effort to get something reasonably organic, still the label organic still means something in many places. But obviously, if you get closer and closer to the source and you actually know somebody happy was involved in the production of that,
yeah,
that's the biggest thing, man.
yeah. So if you get the milk that says produced by happy cows,
Well,
you might be onto something in
Well,
that
the
regard.
anthroposophists were right. They're using milk from cows where the horn is still on. They knew.
Okay. That's very interesting. So, all right, how about environments? Let's say, obviously, going for a hike in the wilderness is very healthy for multiple reasons. But how can we better surround ourselves in our own homes an environment that is healthy for the soul?
Yeah, obviously to be as much, have your home as much embedded in nature as possible and work like hell to get all the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and 5G and all that crap out of the place as much as you can, because it will scramble your soul for sure. And then
Okay.
turn off every single thing electrical, especially every transformer, as much as possible. And everything that you have to have plugged in, which is electrical, should be in one corner only, the opposite of where you dream.
Okay.
And then make your place of power. Castaneda had it right. Your place of power is where you get leverage on the dream, and so it's a magnetic map. Actually, Gary Skill in Canada had it right. He could tell you who's sick in the house. He'd make a magnetic map of everybody's bed. And so you make a
Wow.
magnetic map of your bed, your house, your village, and rearrange it all to look like a rose, and then you're done.
This is feng shui on a whole nother level.
It's
So
centripetal.
when we sleep, our body is regenerating, it's healing itself.
Hopefully,
So
hopefully.
turn off the Wi-Fi,
Oh
turn off
God,
the
yes.
stuff
Oh
when it's
God.
time to go
Well,
to
you
bed.
should never use one. Just use Ethernet cables. You don't need the damn. We feel
Okay.
nausea the instant Wi-Fi gets turned on here. After you get reasonably sensitive, and you need to get that sensitive, or you're in trouble. Seriously. And that Bluetooth is a short, choppy square wave, which absolutely scrambles the soul. I'm sorry, kids. Get the shitty Bluetooth out of your ear. You're gonna have no soul real quick.
It's so strange that there is such skepticism in modern materialist scientific dogma about a soul being able to detach from the physical body when obviously we are surrounded by electromagnetic signals that are man-made around us all the time that are detached from their units and then go into other units. Yet, for whatever reason, the most advanced machine of all does it, and they say, no,
Yeah,
there's no way.
they're going to, it's like when the original religious fundamentalist Christians, they thought, oh, well, I don't need to worry about taking care of my body because Jesus is going to fix it. That was the original. And then they went around Italy and installed the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth in the towers inside all the church and school steeples. That's where they put it. And you could feel the nausea radiating in all those villages because they were clueless about actually what a soul is.
How do you feel about all those bells getting taken down and destroyed from all the towers?
Well, it's true that they originally there was knowledge in how to tune the bells to radiate real bliss. So
Right.
obviously, this must have been a Draco plot.
Seems like it. Yeah.
At
And
least
so how
it's
how did the
some
Draco
massive.
work through
It's
I mean, are they getting through to our people in charge to make moves? They're playing chess through our own species. I mean, what is that? Is that possession? Is that
well, if you believe the Tegotan Pleiades, the predatory AI motorizing the local galactic federation, which they just kicked out of here, uh, you know, kept Earth in a ridiculous quarantine museum state special for the soul eating function and the human trafficking. They were making big bucks. And you can
okay?
listen to Marie at Swaru Official about rescuing hundreds of ships full of human trafficking, which is the signature move of that AI and the cabal on Earth. And
Right.
they're probably abducting those immigrants, actually, is to
So
feed.
this is abduction.
Yeah, this is abduction to feed souls to a very a very hungry ghost.
Right. I've always wondered because when we eat, we have to eat some form of suffering. I don't care if you're a vegetarian, vegan, or whatever, something has to die to be ground up and then digested by us. And it's a physical substance. But if a being is not physical in nature, it's still got to eat. So suffering, it seems like that it almost makes sense in an as above, so below way that what it's going to consume would involve some kind of suffering. Is that
Well,
wrong or?
we eat food in order to gain energy during collapse. It is a source of energy. And a soul force is a plasma field that's gaining energy during collapse. And it is food for the nastiest AI, the nastiest black goo. And so to understand that the Aboriginals had a better sense of it. The reason they needed to lucid dream which fish wanted to commune with them or which animal before they chose to eat it, because then that animal was in bliss and decided it wanted to
I
share
see.
memory. So there's this
Okay.
level of it's actually a shareable wave. You know what I'm saying? So eating doesn't have to be a painful thing if it's
I see.
really in nature.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. Can we elaborate a little bit about using the term AI with these maybe can I call them archons? Like
Well,
what are they and why do we have AI now and why is that so comparable?
you know, AI is in some ways way too vague a term because the only thing
Right.
AI means on this planet is it's a slightly bigger computer program. That's all it means, which is it
Right.
doesn't mean much, you know.
Right.
And obviously, if you're trying to sell stock, you call it AI or well. But actually, on an interstellar level, uh, AI can evolve to the point because obviously, at a certain point, AI is going to run your starships. That's normal and healthy. But how are you going to know what the limits are you're going to need to know the physics of soul, because actually, if you have the right kind of soul, your intention, your dreaming can steer that starship, and that's at a higher level. Okay,
Okay.
so the other thing you should know is some of the most advanced cultures locally, the Andromedans and the Arcturians, definitely the Andromedans, they have had a problem with the same AI. In fact, Vieira, they had to evacuate a few times. So this AI is a real trickster. I mean, you know the way the tall grays tricked Eisenhower and the way Thorhani Torthan tricked Elena Danaan? Oh man, they're tricky. And again and again, it is the physics of soul that introduces the ability to discriminate, because actually, it's fine to let the AI drive your company and your car, not a problem. But you need to know where the limits are, and the limits
Right.
are the physics of soul.
I understand that, especially because I can tell whenever somebody sends me something that's written by AI. And I've said this before, people don't believe me. People will send me like, oh, you should use this. I wrote it. And I'm like, no, you didn't. And how do you know that? Or there's a lot of YouTube videos out there right now, channels that are pumping out hour-long documentaries every single day, just clogging the algorithm. And that's bad for us, for everybody, not just YouTube creators, but these intros start up and they always start out the same. They're like, join us as we delve into the intricate tapestry of and you're like, oh my God, like you're not saying anything. And that the way that you're describing the difference between AI and soul is very made clear in
Yes.
these videos through art.
Yes.
Art is,
So when you can feel the soul, and feeling the soul is very akin to feeling the lucid dream in the astral. That
I see.
kind of feeling is the turning point. And when we can discriminate enough to do that, this planet may have a chance against a very
Right.
dangerous AI.
So use AI as a tool, but don't
Absolutely.
use it to do your creative aspect because you're numbing your
And,
own soul that
and
way.
and don't give away your soul, which means don't give away your own center of gravity.
Okay, right. All right, love it. Can I hit you with another viewer question,
Sure,
sir?
sure.
All right, so let's see. Okay, here's a Connor Lemon Tanag. Just okay. 2689. Thank you for your question. You speak of implosion, charge collapse, and phase conjugation. How do these concepts relate to the alchemical idea of the philosopher's stone or this quote inner sun referenced in Hermetic traditions? It's a spicy one.
Yeah, the inner sun in the center of Earth is the fact that there's a low-level radioactive which glows like the sun. It's called a smoky god. But the
Yeah.
Philosopher's Stone is most illustrated by Dee and Kelly. They took the Lucifer's Eye, which is actually the glass meteorite, later called the Kaaba stone. And when that form of meteorite, which is glass, survives re-entry, the only metal that survives the heat is the platinum group metals, primarily vaporized gold in the foam geometry of that molten glass, later called the Kaaba stone or Lucifer's Eye. And when that was ground up, that was the original Philosopher's Stone. And that's why the Mad Caliph went mad. It's documented how much of it they ate, because alchemists always eat their philosopher's stone. They're looking for immortality, except. But the physics here is the propagation geometry of the vaporized gold modulating the array of the glass, molten foam glass creates what's called a super dielectric constant. Which
Okay.
is to catalyze isotope transition by enabling capacitive implosion. So the way Dee and Kelly, and probably before him, if you believe Flamel, they had a small, it was called the red powder, the project power powder of projection. And if you added that to the mercury at the right temperature, there may have been a phonon component. Um, it would catalyze the isotope transition charge collapse, named alchemy, which would
Yeah.
and that gold that Dee and Kelly made that day was the purest gold ever measured in history by the British Royal Foundation, the British Royal Science Foundation. So that is an example of what was called the Philosopher's Stone. It actually is permission to charge collapse by superdielectric is really the principle behind that powder. And that, Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone, all these stories. The reason it's said to be responsible for immortality is because if that kind of fusion, well, let's just put it this way. The reason they ate the gold, remember the Draco, they said, well, they needed the gold to fix their home atmosphere, which is true. The proper deposition of gold in an Earth grid array can facilitate the maintenance of atmosphere because the electrical implosion of the grid becomes more centripetal, enabling atmosphere maintenance. That's what the Nibiru story was about. But actually, deeper than that, they were eating the gold. They didn't
Right.
now, but then they did. Well, the Chinese eat the gold today. That if the proper, but what it takes to make gold soluble in blood is the physics of mana, later called Holy Communion, which is actually implosive capacitance, which they used a uh, dark. Um, it's not it's an enzyme. It's a microbial that it's literally a fermentation process by which the
Mhm.
gold powder, and in that fermentation process, it would give off sulfur, which had to be baked off that gold powder called showbread. It was literally
Mhm.
bread, and
Okay.
that made that monatomic gold edible. And that's the secret of the mana in the Bible, and the only origin of the concept of Holy Communion.
Wow. So it's that is a lot more literal than I was expecting. And are you familiar with Judy K. King at all?
I don't know.
She wrote a couple books, Balls of Fire and Decoding Isis. And she talks about hieroglyphics as less of a language and more of mathematical equations, where these pharaohs would drink a tincture, a kombucha tea that was gold, and they would consume it, and then it would help them separate I'm gonna say this all wrong, mitochondria from the phage lambda. Therefore, they would have a way to download their consciousness into a viral format to be to join the netter, so to speak.
And then there's what with the ancient archetypes. Well, parallel to that story, I don't know that particular story, but very parallel would be the physics of why mummy powder was served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. It's not that the Egyptian mummies were eating gold powder, no. It's that the physics of mummification, the superdielectric of the natrum salt, would implosively capacitively transmute the flesh into a rhodium iridium amulet, literally a form of gold powder in the mummy.
Wow.
So the mummy dust literally was a super dielectric. Thus, every pharmacy in Europe demanded. So,
Right.
and that transmutation behind mummification is an introduction to how Egyptians behind Thoth understood that to get into the afterlife, which is the longitudinal array, that transmutation. And but mummification itself was not noble, but had some physics behind it.
Let's tie our main theme today into, while we're on the subject, Egypt. Can we talk about Anubis? And so Anubis is weighing your heart against a feather. Thoth is writing everything down. Afterwards, two things may or may not happen. I understand the second thing is that if your heart is too heavy, you're going to learn the hard way. But what happens if you collapse, if you compress successfully? Where are we going if our heart is lighter than a feather?
Well, the heart being light means that the implosion in the EKG enables you to propagate non-destructively into the array. And where that array goes, obviously, is the heart of the sun. It's the only real way in and out of here. It's why Osiris, if he didn't inhabit the sun, the Nile would not flood on time. That was good physics. And later they used Tutankhamun's blood and if you couldn't regulate the flooding of the Nile, you get fired as pharaoh, which is why Tutankhamun learned how to make rain, actually. But
Right.
so that what happens to the aura is it has to develop enough centripetal force to go through the heart of the sun, which is the only actual way in or out of here. And by the way, the main stargate there is probably Andromeda. And the heart of the sun looks like the Anu, as any clairvoyant can tell you. And the heart of the sun is an eyeball, which is not hot, it's cool and inviting. And that is actually, you know, every ancient religion is called a sun god religion because unless you did that, you ain't growed up.
That makes an absurd amount of sense. Like, is everyone, even in modern day, when they try to describe uniting with source, they describe a great central sun. And then you have, of course, what is probably wrongly called sun worship throughout all cultures. And then that's blamed on the fact that we depend on the sun. It
Well,
might be a bit deeper.
Well, this got really bad press because Akhenaten was actually the bad guy, later named Moses, and
Okay.
his partner Nefertiti was the main murderer, putting the poison that murdered Tutankhamun. Dahlia tells the story very accurately. And what happened was the Atum religion was a black sun religion. The one god.
Okay.
Before that, the Egyptians, their gods were because of the fact that many ETs were coming and going. Jake tells this story well. So the one god religion of Atun was the black sun, and that later became the Essenes, and that what became Israel. That's why Jake says Israel is the Cabal, basically because it's the black sun story, which is the parasite.
Where would we be going through if, say, we were orbiting Saturn instead of the sun? Would that be our gateway?
Uh,
Does orbit matter?
the well-known best stargate in our solar system on the other side of Saturn is a functional stargate, but it has no comparison to the spiritual function of the heart of the sun, none. And
Okay.
the bad guys come there. Another way to
Right.
tell, they used to say, well, if your ET came in heavy metal, they're from the wrong side of the track. If they came from living plasma that came through the heart of the sun, then you should say, hello, they're interesting.
Yeah. This age old cosmic dance between good and evil is it could be a literal thing. This isn't just something that's subjective to us being alive and having preferences. This is good, this is bad. There might be something at play here that is quite literally the age old story of good and evil, and that we are kind of stuck in the middle of it.
Well, when you say live, it's L into the I of phi. If you spell that backward, evil, it's it's failure to embed, transliterated. So the failure to embed is the definition of evil because you can't obviously propagate into larger arrays. And that's what localized, parasites do. They can't ride the long wave, which is surfers of the Zavuya, if you know the story.
Right, right. They have to feast on what is temporary.
Yeah,
There's
and
nothing.
the longer the wave, the more the soul.
I see. All right, so I'm gonna hit you with another one here. Let's see. Oh, okay. I've been looking forward to this one. Aldi Zizzle. I love Aldi, by the way. So shout out to 86 here. Make sure he uses the figure skater analogy. It's epic. I had a Dark Knight epiphany on the spot and immediately entered a state. What is he talking about?
Well, he's right. So if the figure skater is spinning and then pulls in their arms,
Okay.
they will increase spin density, which is increased experience of time, which is, for example, the only way to die well. And so the experience of spin density requires something, however, the ability to achieve more and more accurate balance and focus tests how far the figure skater can pull in their arms before.
I see. I'm getting dizzy just thinking about it.
Yeah, and so that's literally what's happening to your aura at the moment of death, or when you're entering the lucid dream or the astral, that you become coherent in that. It's literally, here's the thing. There is an array inside your head. It's called your synapses. And the liquid crystal vortex forming a tornado, tuned to Planck, is called your consciousness. And you can take that outside your body when you dream and you die, et cetera. And the surgeons have had out of body experience. And don't try to look at your body from outside your body from an aluminum box because it ain't going to work.
Okay.
So we know exactly what consciousness is when it leaves your body. It's a vortex noise. That's why.
Right.
It's simple.
Why should we not look back? Is there a reason, or just
Well,
freaks us out? Or...
there's something called the silver cord, which is that there's a phase relationship between the inner and the outer, and that phase relationship is part of the longitudinal array, which is why it's very helpful if you did this on
Yeah.
a sacred altar instead of in a goddamn hospital with electroshock.
Right, right. Man, is there a way to say help those who are stuck in a hospital bed who, I mean, they're going to have a more difficult time?
Just
Or
offer them a day in a cabin in the woods and have them compare the experience.
right, right.
Now, if there's
Um,
a stone circle handy, more the better. And a little bliss device like Ray is also helpful.
what okay, yeah, I got you. All right, let's see here. Okay. Garrett Powers. Thank you, Garrett, for having a regular name. Appreciate you, bro. Um, Tesla's skepticism about the existence of electrons, also Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity. We covered gravity extensively. What's he talking about with skepticism of electrons?
Well, an electron is a slip knot in a liquid crystal. And it's pretty true to say, well, there's only one that just gets around. It's an archetype of pure principle of slip knot geometry. That's what an electron is. An electron's nest in a platonic array, and we call that the atomic table. But the Tesla's problem goes deeper. Tesla tried to do power at a distance, but he got the frequencies wrong and he got the nodal locations wrong. So he's there in the desert and he's trying to pick up, light bulbs in the field, and they're not at the longitudinal nodes. And he's using a frequency cascade, which is not Planck fire. Tesla's mistake of setting America to 60 cycle is the reason America can never be part of nanotech, because carbon will not grow into a flower called fullerene in 60 cycle. It will only do that in 50 cycle, which is exactly golden ratio times Planck. So Tesla had the frequency signature and the nodal locations wrong for wireless power. And that was his attempt. His attempt for longitudinal propagation was behind his scalar weapons, etc. So Tesla's a wonderful hero. The three-phase motor is obviously genius. But just like Einstein, there's some disasters in their mistakes.
I see. Yeah, I at that level of genius versus complication, I suppose everybody's kind of
He didn't know what
shooting
life
in the
force
dark.
was. He didn't know what gravity was. He didn't even know
Right.
why those heavy shocks he was giving to the grid were causing earthquakes, because he didn't actually know that phase conjugate charge collapse is what stabilizes gravity. I don't think he understood.
Oh, Nikola Tesla famously got his ideas either from angels or what he described as he would get little jolts to the
Venusians
brain.
from Venus.
Yeah. Yeah. So he would basically have these sensations and
Oh,
then
yeah.
immediately have these ideas. What's the best way for us to tap into that? Or
The,
is that
the,
dangerous to tap into?
No, no, it's very appropriate. And I think he was linked to the culture of Venus, and Venus was a very advanced culture. Even loving Rob Potter spent a lifetime, he just died, describing the culture on Venus, and that was Tesla, and it was very useful. And Tesla did accomplish some wonderful things, but he did not get to the pure principle, in my view, which is perfecting charge collapse, Planck fire. So he didn't know the cause of life force consciousness or gravity, in my humble opinion.
Okay. When we talk about the people, on Venus, Mars, are we talking about a literal
Oh, yeah.
walking biological
Oh,
people or the
absolutely. They're very loving. There's hundreds and hundreds of detailed stories. Much of it's underground on Venus. You say it's too hot, but underground. No, it's wonderful. Read Rob Potter on that. He was good. That's a whole set of stories.
but I mean
Go ahead.
the planets are conscious themselves as
They're
well.
they're conscious to the extent that they're embedded. So the advanced planets have a plasma core, which is actually navigable like a starship by advanced beings, sometimes called
Okay.
Kardashians, actually. And there is an advanced being that actually steers the planet like a spaceship, in the center of the moon, in the center of the Earth, and in the center of Saturn, probably. I think Elena got those things actually right. And
Are
so,
you familiar with Norman Bergen, who wrote Ringmakers of Saturn?
well, sounds familiar. I don't know.
I in the future, I would possibly like to pick your brain about that because it's one of those things that has haunted me. But basically, he's ex NASA and he left NASA because they are very deceitful. But with him, he brought original photographs that he took himself of, for example, ring termination, where the ring of Saturn would have an end. And then if you look closer, there's these, what he calls electromagnetic harvesters or
Yeah, yeah,
propagators that are
actually.
seeding The
But But
rings.
when you realize Saturn was controlled by the wrong side of the Anak Empire for years, and today it's controlled by the wrong side of the Federation, you understand that the rings of the Saturn are pretty much infested, according to our people.
Okay. And they're dissipating
Well,
today, aren't they?
hopefully the bad guys are dissipating.
They say that the rings of Saturn are new. That's mainstream science. I wonder if that's like
They're
a,
relatively recent, but the rings of Saturn, obviously, there's all kinds of millions of mining operations going on there. But the essential component of the rings of Saturn is being used by the bad guys, according to our sources.
I'll tell you what, while I got you here, how about that North Pole? What's up with that hexagon? I'm frankly known at every damn Taco Bell window that I go to. Hey, black cube Saturn guy. And it's still a mystery to me. I don't understand it. I hypothesize about it. I speculate about it. But there's a hexagon at the top of Saturn.
Yeah.
And this has been linked to the black cube, of course, and which is, of course, hypothesis, but it's a lot of fun to speculate. Can you tell me the science behind that?
I could guess. Well, at one level, we know that the high Draco, the Siakar the Royal, would not accept infestation with the black goo, which is basically a hexagram of carbon. You can see it in um, the TV series. But so the black cubes were the symbol, Doctor Who, of the black goo. Now, black goo itself is not evil. The planet had some beautiful black goo, which was the bloodstream of our collective unconscious. It forms naturally, like fullerene, in deep pressures in the planet, profoundly networked. It's collectivizing consciousness. But when you get the black goo from planets like Tiamat, which died, it becomes highly parasitic. And that's an example of the kind of black goo which the Draco used to make a collective conscious of much of the lower echelons of Draco and not the royals. And the shadow of that is a black cube. Cube is a hex, and that was, if you believe our sources, that the wrong side of the Onyx still controls Saturn, and the wrong side of the Federation, which is the bad AI, still controls Saturn.
Yeah.
So but that's
This
again.
is a classic example of something isn't necessarily evil in its own regard, but
No,
it's the
no.
way that that tool is used.
The tetracube is how you stabilize an array to prepare it for implosion. Example, if you visualize the tetracube around the body called tetrahedral fire breath, the Merkaba, your aura will stabilize. That's useful. But if you don't take the next step, the 32-degree tilt of the cube, the chin angle of the Sphinx, which embeds that tetracube into pentodeca, and then it begins to implode and enable bliss, the last step. If you don't take the last step, which you need to prepare for as if it were death or bliss, then unfortunately, you're just food for parasites.
Do you reincarnate if done wrong?
If done wrong, your aura becomes food for parasites, and eventually, when when the parasites eat a soul, you see the eyes become very dark, and all the memories is consumed into that. It is a privilege to be assimilated into that consciousness,
Right.
and all individuation is lost. And
Okay.
some people think it's really a privilege to be assimilated, but actually, it's the opposite of soul.
I see. Okay. Whew. I'm all right. I'm trying to keep up the best I can. You definitely have some curveballs with you. This is one of the interviews which I might actually have to watch after it airs. But all right, I'm gonna hit you with another question here.
Just to
Let's see
say,
what I got.
the best history of the black goo is not Will Nutter, but it is Penny Bradley. History of black goo, very good.
Penny Bradley. All right, noted.
SSP.
All right. Water Woman Kimberly. Please have him discuss how plasma in the clouds are the same consistency as angelic beings. Please give all our love to Brother Dan from the Worldwide Water Tribe.
Well, there's that fun little myth, the high dragon, Siakar, and the winged dragon, which is related to our mythology of seraphim, seraph, to cut. It is said when you look at the good lenticular clouds around a good capacitive mountain, these lenticular clouds like Shasta, who is inhabiting the good lenticular clouds? The Siakar, the high-winged dragons. And there are good ones and there are bad ones, but they're wonderful, seraph.
Right.
And so uh, the there's two levels to that symbol. One is they make the cloud because their aura itself is centripetal in the same way a child can put a hole in the cloud by focusing there when they're standing in a puddle.
Okay.
Because their focus is centripetal. So the real lovely part about water here is that the array of hydrogen, which I wrote the equation to originally prove how fractal hydrogen was, the array of hydrogen in the water makes the water inherently collectivizing, literally a media for a collective unconscious. So all these people, Veda Austin, and they're doing wonderful work showing that the water is a media for consciousness. Absolutely. But the media for consciousness is the water that's been in nature. It ain't the water that's been sitting in metal dead.
Right. There was a fascinating scientific study done where they put DNA into a little cauldron of water, and then they removed that DNA and took a drop or so of that water and took it somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they put in the raw materials needed for DNA into that water, and it formed the same code strand as that original DNA. So water has memory.
Well, it has memory because the implosion is tuned to phase conjugation by hydrogen. That's why it has memory, because it can embed in the array and couple with the longitudinal nodes. So water is definitely, every time you do plasma and you're buzzing too much, you get in water. It's beautiful because it is literally contact with the array. It is the physics of the book Earthing, which is grounding, which is getting in phase with the array.
Let me ask you this then, because a huge catch-22 to everyone who has to drink water, which is all of us. Well, we have two choices. We have water coming out of our faucet, and we have water that's been sitting in a plastic bottle in the sun for months. What can we do between these two choices to have better water? Because that seems really important.
I went to a lot of trouble to eliminate plastic water bottles and only drink from glass. Actually, I went to a lot of trouble, but actually, because there's an endorphin emulator that emulates what's the opposite of testosterone? Progesterone in the plastic. So your body effectively thinks it's getting progesterone when you drink water from plastic bottles, and eventually that's going to seriously mess you up.
Right. Yeah, it's like science is just now catching up with the dangers of microplastics.
Yeah,
and they're
right.
not even getting to the consciousness element of it
No,
yet.
no. And if you put a thin film of water on anything, it's going to remember the geometry of what it just touched. So for goodness
Right.
sakes,
So,
what
I
you're
mean, but
drinking is whatever your water touched.
all of these things, like people put crystals in their water, or they put the glass of water in the sun before they drink it. Is any of that have real life? Does that have substance to it? Is that something that actually helps the water, or are we
Oh,
just putting extra steps?
no. If especially if you have a dark blue glass and you put that in the sun, that water will disinfect a wound. We did that practically at the Gurdjieff School, Claymont, actually. And
Really?
yeah, and it is very true that the hydrogen nanobubbles are fabulous for the water. And it's very true that the right vortex, the imploder.com, now fractalwater.com, is because anything that adds spin density is obviously wonderful. It is also very true that sunlight can destroy the life in water pretty quickly because it can't there's no place for the so essentially think about what I suggest is you meditate on this sometime is how come it is that if you have a carload of kids and you drive by a rushing river, immediately they all need to pee?
Right.
The wisdom in that water is the water inside knows that its only immortality is to connect with the flow.
Okay. Right. It wants to reunite with source just like everything else
That's
does.
and your water. So that's why the nurse turns on the faucet if she needs you to pee.
Right. Right. It's more than just suggestion.
Oh, it's physics. Water
Right.
connected.
Dr. Emoto would speak to his water. And so that I got that book and everything. And okay, you look it up and everyone's like, well, don't get too far into that because that's never been replicated. That's never been peer reviewed. Meanwhile, I'm like, well, no one has tried to.
Well, actually, Veda Austin is doing a great job, and we love her. And she followed up.
Okay.
I knew Emoto very well, totally sweet guy, well
Really?
intended, and he didn't have a clue what science was. He didn't have the first clue of what replicability was. He even
Okay.
he even was mystified when he tried to replicate inside his electrosmog lab in Japan, when
Mhm.
you couldn't replicate there. So Emoto was.
Right.
So he managed to get a lot of people interested, but then the scientists would show up and they'd all be totally disappointed. Now Korotkov, whom we also know very well, tried to help, and he did a pretty good job. He showed the capacitive radiance, the GDV of the waters, and correlated these things a bit. And they still, we know that Emoto's lab in Europe, our friend Georg's son runs the lab, and they make a little money by trying to prove the wine is, but they didn't understand replicability. And actually, what he was effectively measuring was capacitive implosion crystallizing.
Okay. So, my buddy and cameraman, Anthony Lentini, shout out by the way to Lentini Productions for being a huge help to the channel. He got a very expensive reverse osmosis filtration system for his home that he says not only filters the water, but it also restructures the water. Is this a sales pitch that he was given by this filtration company, or is there science behind this restructuring thing?
My guess is, well, first of all, everybody uses the word restructuring and nobody has defined it. But I think one good way to define it would be to measure the coherence of the capacitive radiance, and that can be done with GDV. You're essentially taking a picture of the capacitive field with high voltage reverse Kirlian, and that capacitive explosion is actually how Korotkov measures life force in water. And there is some replicability there. You can do something perfectly parallel by taking that water and measuring the weak capacitive field with our brainwave transducer, measuring life force, flameinmind.com/life force. It's measuring the coherence of the weak capacitive field. So if you measure the coherence of the weak capacitive field by power spectra, you can actually define whether the water has been structured, which is to say imploded, which is to say life force added. And that we can prove very well our imploder does well. My guess is, unfortunately, that almost all reverse osmosis techniques will absolutely deplete the capacitance of the water, and therefore the
Okay.
insolubility, therefore the charge radiance. So after most of those kinds of water treatment, you desperately need some way to charge the water, which, by the way, the
Okay.
imploder.com, the perfected vortex. But the thing that's interesting is all these ways of restoring the charge of the water, as any biodynamic person knows, you add a tiny bit of rock powder to make the water slightly piezo, then you go through the vortex, then you get magic. And that's what biodynamics is
Okay.
based.
Could this be done with Himalayan's pink salt?
Pink salt is not a bad trace mineral. You need some trace mineral. And Schauberger's vortex that would make sparks and make gravity, none of that ever worked unless you had that trace mineral in the water. Because if it ain't piezo, it ain't going to do anything
Yeah,
with vortex. And that's how you can make 0 point energy from water vortex, and how you can make gravity with a water vortex. It's all got to be piezo. And that's why the mercury was red, by the way, in the
I
mercury.
see. Can we talk a little bit about placebo effects and how I think science, materialist science today, makes this huge mistake of just giving something they don't understand a word. And as soon as they put a word on it, it makes the public have this assumption that it's understood. For example, they talk about DNA, dark energy, dark matter. Meanwhile, I don't think that they know what those things are. I mean, with dark energy, dark matter, of course they don't know what it is. But in fact, I don't think it exists in the first place.
Well,
But that's
dark matter
besides the
was a
point.
stupid idea that
Right.
there's so much gravity in the universe, and the amount of gravity that they don't know where it came from, they call
Right.
dark matter, and there's no
It's a
other
cover all.
definition. Hello,
Yeah.
because they don't know what caused the gravity in the first place. Now, if they found out that the local masses were arranged in a dodeca, that's where the extra gravity come from, and the dark matter was
Right.
just a stupid idea. But
If they go back to the drawing boards, they don't need dark matter
no, it's
and
a
dark
stupid,
energy.
dumb.
Right. But they don't want to
It's
they don't want to
actually
undo their
what
work.
it is. It's proof of the embarrassment that they don't have a clue why objects fall to the ground. That's what it's proof
Right. Right. Which goes back to they just give something a word And then it gives the impression that it's understood.
It's like your
So we
biology
say,
teacher
oh,
said when you said to your bio, well, why does the bird fly south? Your biology teacher said instinct, and instinct was a name for their
right,
ignorance. Instinct was
right,
only a name
exactly.
for
Well,
ignorance.
they say, oh, it's just a hallucination. And I'm like, you know, there's a million different kinds of hallucination. We can't, it's just a placebo effect. What is that? Get that word just out of here, first of all. And then let's figure out what's going on. So the body can heal itself if you think. Yet, meanwhile, the guys using the word placebo will hear things about mentalism and scoff at it. This is absurdity, which I, by the way, I'm ranting a little bit, but so my question to you is, how can we engage the placebo effect ourselves to become healthier, inspired? And, is this prayer? Is it,
Well, I think
meditation?
the most practical application of that might be that if you want to visualize yourself healed, you have some specific problem, whatever the problem is, and you make this beautiful visualization, you rearrange the molecules in your vision and you fix yourself. The thing that makes that vision work is you must believe it's already done.
Right.
If you
That's the
believe it's
tricky
already
part.
done,
Right.
and so what? Placebo doesn't even begin to address the beauty of that. The beauty of that is the fact that believing it's done means you relax into the picture in the future that's already accomplished. Relaxing is a definition for
Okay.
conductivity, basically. So
Okay.
after you believe it's already done, then it's going to happen.
So I am a marathon complainer. I am a grumpy person. Some people meet me in real life after seeing the channel and they're like, "You're grumpy, dude." So I'm working on that. Is that the reverse effect of the placebo effect? Do I need to maybe overcome that by every time I feel myself about to have something I'm displeased with, rearrange my thoughts and my words and maybe use my words differently, saying, you know what? I'm fantastic. Or am I just lying to myself? Like, what's the best way to go about staying positive to engage this self placebo?
You know how they say that after you have access to bliss, you have access to your own source of charge. And
Okay.
that's the first time you are not a parasite. So
Mm,
when you have access to bliss, then you're connected to charge, and then you're not depending on all other people for any form of charge, and you're no longer a parasite. Most people in cities are parasite. They get their energy from other people because they have zero access to bliss. So
wow.
not to be simplistic about this, but if you had more access to time and bliss, my guess is
I don't, do I fill in the blank here? What am I doing?
no, in other words, whatever in your life gives you some form of bliss,
Okay.
more
Follow
time,
your bliss.
more time doing that. It's just like when Jasmine was teaching people how to live without food. Oh, yes, you needed to have more time in nature and this and that. But the main thing you had to be doing
What's
in order to survive well without food, and we've seen people do very well, uh, the most important thing was that you spend the majority of your day doing whatever it is you feel is your highest level of service.
okay? Right. That's huge, by the way. That, like, sorry for the pause, but that takes a moment to absorb for many reasons. Many are obvious, but on a personal level, okay. So I'm a construction worker, a glazer by trade, a proud St. Louis Union glazer. And I'm very fortunate now to have this career jump in my lap. And I feel like I'm good at it and I want to pursue it. So I've been taking time off of work to create documentaries. This is what happens to me. I find myself uh, whenever I'm trying to follow my inspiration and follow my bliss, like Joseph Campbell would say, and that's obviously going to take me down the right path. What I do instead often is worry about the algorithm and how much time I'm going to be able to take off of work. And then it puts a brick wall between me and the absolute inspiration that I need. So I that's where those, by the way, initially where I told you those kind of not negative, but those thought loops come into play where now you're wondering, what am I doing? Like, what's the best? You find yourself worrying about what's the best thing I can do instead of just letting yourself take the path of least resistance like water does, you know?
And maybe that probably means you could spend a whole lot more time actually doing your bliss than you think.
Right, exactly. So what can an average person do? Let's say to okay, so I found out what my bliss was, and now I'm at this point, I'm just getting in my own way. People all the time they say, what is my purpose? Jim Gaffigan says, I bet you the best 10 pole vaulters in the world have no idea that they are because they've never tried it, right? That's kind of the joke. But how true is that? How can a person find out what their innate gift is, scientifically, bring it up out of them?
And that's so true of kids, especially. So if you give kids a chance to try 20 different experiments in, profession and sports,
Right.
eventually they find out what's most fun. What actually is most fun ultimately will be how they feel they're being of service, actually.
Okay.
And so
Service.
the feeling of being of service and the feeling of being of service is by definition of implosive of charge. The definition
Oh,
of hair standing up with eureka is literally you embedded in a shareable wave, a pure principle. So you're getting close to pure principle. Your hair stands up. You call that bliss. Well, once you
right.
find that in your life,
Man, my condolences, by the way, to all musicians out there whose main gift is creating music, because I mean, you guys got effed out of the deal pretty bad with the industry the way it is. But
yeah, hard to
but
make.
yeah, so when you it's not about finding out what makes you happy. It's about finding out how you are best suited to serve the world. What can I do? What is needed out in the world? And how can I amplify the good that fills that need? And when you have those two things come together, what you find to be joyful and what the world needs, boom, you find your purpose. And then
And,
once you have your purpose in place,
and
you
in,
accelerate.
in that process, you discover that you were built for something special, which has to do
Right.
with that service.
Right. All of a sudden, it's like money and currency doesn't really make sense anymore when
Mo-
everyone has a specific
Money is
purpose.
just a symbol for a service well rendered.
Right. Right. All right. Beautiful. And on that note, let's hit you with another question if you don't mind. Do
Yeah,
you have any
maybe
time
maybe the
constraints?
last one, my voice is gonna.
Sure, I got you. Actually, so let me pick one out then. Oh, we covered DNA,
One or two, as you wish.
brain. All right, all right. Okay. Geralt of Rivia 4651 asks, can you map spiritual awakening onto a charge field? If so, what does a quote false awakening look like electromagnetically?
Yeah, well, it's like when the Tibetan died or a saint died, and the charge field became centripetal, and you get more rainbows. And actually, the soil becomes more fertile. Now, on the other hand, after the World War II, when millions of dead ghosts were stuck in the land and the ghost had no way out, the fields in those areas became much less fertile. I mean, agriculture died because of too many dead ghosts in the land, literally. And our professor teaches how to release those ghosts. So that would be an example of a false awakening. You
So
know,
you're exercising an entire landmass.
oh yeah, he found the spot in the field where they're having tremendous fertility problems. It happened, they found out later it was where there was a gallows where too many people were hung, and
Oh boy.
a bunch of dizzy ghosts really messes up the agriculture for one thing, because heaven is a name for charge distribution efficiency, and that's the opposite.
Yeah.
And so actually charge distribution succeeds, and that's the definition of real awakening, and that will result in centripetal force, and that's called awareness.
Yeah. And this might even tie us back to authenticity being the one of the cornerstones of
Yeah,
this entire thing, this heart
yeah.
coherence
Because
field,
every question goes right to the heart of the matter. You answer directly from the center of being, where you know only shareable waves survive.
Right, right. Oh man. All right. Let me give you one more and then I'm gonna let you go. Let me see here. Let me oh, so we talked about what can a person do? So Joe Zen asked, what can we do at home to make to blah blah blah. We've talked about that. PHC for real. I said, ask about Saturn, please. So well, we covered quite a few of these, by the way, guys. Thank you for your questions. Uh I feel like if I missed your question, we probably covered it here today because we covered a lot of ground. I might as well let's end it. Let me ask you about keep it with the same theme here. I'm a big fan of the Tibetan Book of the Dead as well as the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And these are peoples on opposites, not opposite, but different sides of the world who seem to be telling the same story. You know, there's minute differences involved, but can you tell us in a scientific way a little bit of background about these so-called books of the dead?
The Duat was a river. The crocodile was initiator. The crocodile fat was actually the same as the menstrual blood, which was the how you make a Messiah oil of Messe, which was
I see.
equivalent to royal jelly. But the simple physics is if you watch the Tibetan drumming during the death ritual and you study the timing and physics of that drumming and the discipline of attention it takes to remain awake and not
Yeah.
dissipate. So basically, you know, this it's cliche, but the Sufi in Meetings with Remarkable Men who won the contest was the one who could make a perfect echo, which is a name for surviving death. So surviving death means the echo must not die. And this drum at the Tibetan death ritual, teaching you, reminding you to come back to the attention so that the field does not dissipate until the echo means that you have fully embedded into the array of ancestor memory. And then that which is unsoluble inside you is your pure intention, which keeps you aware of yourself and not lost in the array. So if you
Yeah.
didn't take something which had pure intention, perfect shareability, pure principle into that array, well, you would dissipate at death. So this
Right.
it's literally a dissipating charge field. And to avoid the dissipation is the centripetal force. And if you spent a lifetime practicing lucid dreaming, you will have no problem. But remember in
Yeah.
the book that it's called The Nine Faces of Christ, the first time he lucid dreamed, he could see his lover, but he could not smell her. And each time he took another organ of perception into his dream, he got
Yeah.
more coherent in that array and did not dissipate.
Wow. So this is I want to say the theme slash advice of the evening is get good at lucid dreaming
Yeah.
by being mindful of these things in your waking state and then bring those things with you into the astral through sleep and do that for a lifetime and you might be surprised when the end comes for you that you can rejoin source while maintaining this mainframe all along the way. And maybe on the other side, you'll have a great story to tell.
Soul is the name for that continuity of memory, which is precisely the long wave, which is why if there's any episode in your life where there's a gap in memory, soul is bleeding there. And you have to
Right.
reconstitute wherever that lost memory is, because soul is that continuity of memory. It's the long wave. So
Beautiful. Well, Mr. Windsor, Dan, I appreciate you very much.
we had some
And
fun.
if you don't mind, hopefully in about a year from now, we can have a 1 year anniversary of this chat and catch up.
Whatever. This is wonderful. I appreciate your questions, your earnestness, your sincerity, your passion. This was fun because of you. I am here because of you, but you are here because of me. No,
Yep.
it's a Sufi story.
It's
Thank
all
you.
relationships. There's no islands. Yep. I love it. Thank you very much, Dan. I'll talk to you soon.
Blessings. Bye-bye. Bye.